used to walk through the Arboretum at night all the time, and it never scared me once because I knew the trails better than I knew the back of my own hand, since I ran them almost every morning while it was still dark and quiet and peaceful. And I always felt like that place belonged to me. Somehow that night my boyfriend and I went out around 10:30, just looking to pass time and maybe spot a possum or raccoon, and it wasn't anything serious, just a casual walk through a place I knew like home. And we took the same trail I always took, which was simple because you take the first left, then walk straight with no turns, and it loops around the edge, where you can still see the football field and houses just beyond the trees. And it was supposed to be just another calm night. About 45 minutes into the walk, I heard a sound to the left that reminded me of a small animal, like maybe a squirrel or armadillo. And I stopped and looked, even though the grass wasn't tall and it should have been easy to spot something. But I saw nothing, and my boyfriend pointed and asked if I saw a deer. But I didn't, and he kept saying he could see it moving, and that it had leapt across the path. But I heard no sound, and saw no movement, and everything just felt too still. All of a sudden the forest went quiet, in a way that didn't feel natural, like the air got heavier, and even the bugs seemed to go silent, except for a faint distant hum. And I tried to laugh it off, and joked that maybe he was hallucinating, and he kind of laughed too, and mentioned how weird it was for a deer to be out there all alone. But we shrugged it off and kept walking, even though the feeling in my chest started to change. After a few more minutes, I noticed something was off, and I couldn't recognize the trail anymore, which made no sense, because I knew every twist and dip and root and branch from memory. And suddenly the dirt looked wrong, and the smell in the air was stronger, and reminded me of smoke or burnt leaves or weed. And I turned to him, and told him this was not the right trail, and that something wasn't adding up. Then the path split in front of us, with one trail going straight ahead into complete darkness, and another smaller path curving off to the right in the direction I knew the entrance should be. And even though he thought we should keep going, I told him no, and led us right, because my gut was screaming at me not to go forward anymore. We had only gone maybe 15 feet down that new path when I heard a single crunch in the grass to the right, like a branch breaking under pressure, and I stopped and asked if he had heard it too. And he took out his phone and turned on the flashlight, and I started scanning the tall grass, which was thick and reached up to my chest. And even though there were no trees in that area, it still felt closed in. He suddenly said my name in a quiet and sharp voice, and told me to look, and I looked up above where I had been searching, and that's when I saw in them two eyes glowing, an unnatural bright blue, and they were slanted like a cat's eyes, but too big and too still, and they were at a height that made my stomach drop, because they had to be at least 9 feet off the ground, and they weren't reflecting the light from the phone because they glowed on their own, like they were lit from inside. The eyes moved, and not quickly but slowly and smoothly, like they were scanning us, and I saw them shift from him to me, and then they started to move sideways, but not toward us, and not like a person would move, because there was no sound, and no rustling, and the grass didn't part, and it didn't walk, it just glided, and it was completely silent. I grabbed his arm and said we needed to leave right now, and told him not to run, because in my head I was trying to convince myself that maybe it was a bear, even though it didn't move like any bear I've ever seen, and it didn't make noise, and no bear has eyes like that. We started walking quickly while it stayed just behind us at maybe 10 feet, and it never moved faster and never backed off, and it didn't charge or roar, or even breathe loudly, but it kept coming, and always at that same distance, and every few steps I looked back, and it was still there, just following, and never blinking, and never looking away. It didn't walk in a straight line either, because it weaved almost crookedly, and its steps were impossible to hear, and I couldn't even tell if its feet were touching the ground. And then suddenly it made a sound, and I don't even have the right words for it, because it wasn't like any animal I've ever heard. It was a shriek that pierced through me, and didn't sound like a mountain lion or a coyote, or even a bird. because it had this sharp, unnatural tone like a person screaming underwater or metal, bending too far, and it made my legs go numb. And I felt my chest tighten, and before I knew it, we were both running. We didn't even say anything, we just ran. And I started praying out loud, and he did too. And I didn't care how it sounded, because I was terrified, and I didn't know if it was behind us or beside us or if it was waiting somewhere ahead. But we just ran, and the forest started to feel alive again with the sounds of bugs and crickets, suddenly coming back, like whatever had silenced them was now gone or losing its grip. I called my stepdad while we ran and told him everything, and he stayed on the phone with me and didn't once laugh or question me. And he kept his voice steady and told us to keep going, and I could tell from how he spoke that he believed me and that he was trying to keep me calm, even though I know he must have been scared too. Eventually the path looked familiar again, but even then it still felt wrong, like we had gone through something we weren't supposed to. And my boyfriend kept saying things like, "This isn't the right way," even though it clearly was. And he kept glancing back and said he felt like something wanted him to go back and that his body kept urging him to turn around, which made everything feel even worse. We finally made it out, and I couldn't stop shaking, and I knew I couldn't go back to my dorm, which was near the woods, so I stayed at his place until the sun came up. And even then I couldn't sleep, and every time I closed my eyes I saw those glowing eyes and the tall grass, and that sound echoed in my ears. I didn't sleep properly for almost 2 days, and when I finally passed out, it was a restless nap that left me more tired than before. And since that night I can't be outside alone, and I can't stand being near trees, and if I have to walk somewhere I need someone on the phone or next to me. We've talked about it since then and tried to figure out what it was, and we went through every possibility. And maybe it was a panther, but there are no panthers in this part of Florida. And maybe it was a bear, but bears don't move like that, and they don't have glowing blue eyes, and they definitely don't scream like that. At one point we even wondered if it could have been a drone or something built to scare people, but there was no mechanical noise and no flicker, and no red lights, and nothing about it felt like a machine. Whatever it was, it didn't belong in that forest, and it didn't feel like it belonged in this world. And the worst part is we both saw it, and we both knew it was real, and we both ran, and I don't think I'll ever forget it. This happened when I was 12 years old, and now that I'm 19 I still think about that night more often than I'd like to admit, because I've never been able to make sense of it, and no matter how much time passes, the memory still lingers in the back of my mind like something that refuses to fade. Back then I was in 4th grade, and my class went on a school trip for a week, and we traveled together with the other class in our year to a quiet spot in southern Germany, near the Austrian border, where we stayed in this really old inn that looked like it had seen hundreds of years pass by. And the owner even told us that the place had been there for centuries. And I remember the way the wooden floors creaked under our feet, and how everything smelled old in a comforting way, and those thick beams in the ceiling made it feel like we were sleeping in a building pulled out of a black and white movie. The whole week was simple and fun, and nothing seemed out of place, because we spent our time doing regular things like visiting a museum that showed how glass used to be made, and we played games near the river that flowed quietly past the inn, and we laughed and enjoyed ourselves, and there was never a moment where I felt uneasy or like something was wrong, because everything felt normal and safe. Then came Thursday night, and since it was our last night there, the teachers wanted to do something special, so they organized a small party later in the evening. But before that they took us on a night hike through the forest right beside the inn. And I was really excited at first, because there was something fun about walking in the woods at night with your friends, even if the idea made your heart beat a little faster. The forest path was narrow, and to one side of us, there were thorny bushes that looked like they'd scratch you if you got too close. And on the other side was this steep cliff that dropped away into darkness, and no one really knew how far down it went. And that kind of added to the thrill. And we weren't alone on the hike, because one teacher was walking in front of our group, and another was at the back to make sure no one got lost or left behind. But my friends and I wanted to be out front and lead the way, so when the teacher in the front got distracted talking to a couple of kids who were arguing about something pointless, we saw our chance, and without saying anything, we quietly ran ahead along the path, feeling brave and a little mischievous. And as we walked further, it started to feel like we were in our own little world, because the woods were quiet except for the sound of our footsteps, and the moon gave off just enough light to make the path visible if you kept your eyes open. Eventually we reached a place where the trail curved to the right, because the cliff stuck out more sharply there, and the path had to go around it, and that's when we saw the light. It wasn't flickering or shaking like someone holding a flashlight might cause, but steady and bright, and it shone from somewhere beyond the curve, maybe 15 meters ahead, and it cut through the trees in a clean straight line like someone was standing there pointing a light, but not moving. And we stopped in our tracks, not really scared, but definitely curious, because it felt out of place. By then the teacher had caught up with us and asked why we ran ahead, and we pointed at the light, and he looked and said it was probably someone else on the trail, maybe a local just going for a walk. And I wanted to believe that, but something about the way the light stood still made me feel like that explanation didn't really fit. The teacher called out, and his voice echoed through the woods, but no one replied. And he called out again, louder, but the forest stayed quiet, and the light didn't move or even flicker, and it was like it wasn't connected to a person at all. Despite that, we were kids, and our curiosity was stronger than our fear, so we kept walking toward the light, slowly and carefully. And the teacher came with us without saying much, and we got closer and closer, and I remember how I counted the distance in my head, and at 10 meters the light was still there, and at 5 it didn't change, and at 3 it suddenly went out, gone in an instant without a sound or a hint of movement. And we stepped into the spot where it had been, and there was nothing waiting for us, no person, no flashlight, no object that could explain what we had seen. Just darkness and silence, and the soft rustling of the wind through the trees. We stood there trying to understand what had just happened, and if it had been someone standing there, they would have had to move incredibly fast to vanish without us noticing, and there was nowhere for them to go, because the cliff was right behind, and the thorny bushes on the other side would have made too much noise if anyone tried to move through them. But we heard nothing. Even the teacher looked confused, and I remember how he scanned the area with his flashlight, and how he kept quiet like he didn't want to say what he was thinking, because whatever that was, it didn't make sense. We eventually turned back and returned to the inn, and the rest of the night went on like nothing had happened, with music and dancing and people laughing. But I couldn't shake the image of that light from my head, and I kept wondering who or what it could have been. The next morning, a few of us were talking about it during breakfast, and the innkeeper overheard us and came over, and what he said has stayed with me more than anything else that week. He told us that at the very end of World War II, many people in that area had been afraid of what would happen when the Allies arrived, because there were so many rumors and so much panic, and out of fear, some of the locals had taken their families to that very cliff and ended their lives. And he said it softly, like it hurt to remember, like the land still held on to that grief. Then he left and went back into the kitchen, and no one said anything after that, because what could you say? I don't know what that light was, or what it meant, or if it had anything to do with the story the innkeeper told us, but I do know that it was real, and it was there, and then it wasn't, and I still can't explain it. After all these years, I've tried to think of logical answers. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or a reflection, or a prank, or something else entirely. But nothing really fits, because there was no glass, no metal, no time for someone to run, and no reason for anyone to just stand silently in the woods without replying or reacting. And the way it disappeared felt too strange to be ordinary. And maybe that's what bothers me the most, not the fear or the mystery, but the not knowing, the part where your brain keeps trying to solve something that has no answer. 7 years have passed, and I've grown up and moved on in a lot of ways, but I still think about that night from time to time, and when I do, I feel the same quiet chill in my chest, and I still see that beam of light frozen in the woods, and I wonder if some things are just not meant to be understood. Maybe forests keep memories trapped inside them, and maybe they let pieces of the past echo forward in ways we can't quite grasp. And maybe what we saw wasn't meant for us at all, but we saw it anyway. Whatever it was real, and it has stayed with me, and sometimes I think that's what makes it matter.
If you liked the video, don't forget to like and share. Subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos like this.